Unfortunately, the sad news about the former Secretary of State, Colin Powell, dying from complications from COVID. Now, he is 84 years old. There are some multiple reports coming out about his health issues, but obviously it's going to really raise, the red flag about breakthrough deaths.
No, it's a sad day, and I think this is a loss for all of us. I think this is something Democrat, Independent, Republican. Colin Powell was a special individual, and I think we're all going to feel that loss. But it does, I think, raise a lot of important questions about vaccines. And so one of the things that I was actually having a conversation earlier this morning about is the fact that vaccines are not 100% really at any level of efficacy. So people who are vaccinated, they still can get infection, they still can get infected, they still can end up in the hospital, they still can die. But it's a tremendous reduction, right? We don't stop wearing our seatbelts because we heard someone died in a car accident and they were wearing their seatbelts. But if you compare the numbers, over 700,000 Americans have died from COVID. Only, I'm going to use the word only, 7,000 vaccinated have died. That's a tremendous reduction. It's not zero. And in a situation like Colin Powell, this gentleman, he was 84, which is not great. He was a man of color, and we know that this disease has hit different populations with a tremendous degree of inequity. And he actually had a blood cancer, so not an individual we would feel confident would get that protection post-vaccination. So an individual that you would be considering doing those prophylactic monoclonal antibodies to try to get that extra level of protection. But this is a tragedy, but I think it's a reminder when people say, oh my gosh, fully vaccinated people, why are we wearing masks? Why are we doing all these things? There are vulnerable individuals like Colin Powell who still are at risk even when we have widespread access to vaccines.
And the CDC is tracking breakthroughs and doing it by vaccine.
I think that's really important, right? We need the information, and the CDC actually now has a wonderful COVID tracking page where you can go and you can look and you can ask all those questions. What about the different infections and the different deaths relative to different vaccines, relative to different ages? And you can see this tremendous difference. Certainly, every day a few people do die who have been vaccinated against COVID, but over 1,000 people are dying a day unvaccinated. With this data is being tracked, we're keeping an eye on it. Not only keeping an eye on this, we're also following after the fact. How do those vaccinated people do if they survive that infection?
All right, let's talk about that advisory panel. Obviously, we had some big meetings last week. We're waiting, with bated breath to see what they're exactly going to come out with this week. But it seemed to me that this advisory panel almost essentially told Johnson & Johnson it should be a 2-shot vaccine, right?
Yeah, so let's start there with the J&J vaccine. Initially when we were looking at vaccines, the advice was we really need a bar of 50% protection, and that'll get you there. And J&J felt confident enough that 1 shot would get them there. 1 shot getting up into the 70s, actually, so even higher. But now the question is, can we do better? Because the mRNA vaccines have really set a new bar. Can we get the J&J into the 90s? And the data that they presented this week said a 2nd shot of J&J gets us up into the 90s, gets us up at that mRNA level. Now, wide confidence intervals, we'll have to see how this plays out, but we're really asking for more and more from those vaccines. So 1 shot of J&J is still considered fully vaccinated, but boy, if you wait 2 to 6 months to get that 2nd shot, it looks like efficacy data is up there in the 90s. Now, great point here, because the efficacy is great. J&J does not produce a tremendous number of antibodies. It looks like its superpower is the T cell. And some of the stuff we're seeing in the last week here, maybe 10 times, maybe a log higher level of T cell activation with J&J. And those antibodies we see may be more durable with J&J. So the jury's still out, in all honesty, is what's the best vaccine. But a 2nd dose of J&J is straightforward if you want to get even more protection from that J&J vaccine strategy.
And just for everybody at home, myself included, the nuance there between what my antibodies are and then the cells and their response, which one is more important to watch in all of this?
So in all honesty, we don't know at this point. We do know that people with high antibody levels get infected. We do know that people with high antibody levels can end up in the hospital and die. The immune system is, we use the military analogy. The antibodies are maybe the ground troops, but we think of the T cells as the air support. So yeah, the ground troops, if you've got ground troops, but some side has much better air support, maybe this is appropriate with Colin Powell. You bring in those bombers and those jets and okay, game over for the virus. So we won't need those ground troops. We need those antibodies. Those are our front line of defense. But then we need those T cells, those bombers. And that's why I think we're seeing such great efficacy numbers so far with J&J, despite not seeing so many ground troops.
I also want to talk about the age with J&J. This isn't, or it doesn't seem to me that they're going to come out and say, hey, 65 or, a forward-facing job. It's looking like it's going to be 18 and older.
Yeah, J&J is really an extension of the current EUA. It's saying, if you got one dose under the EUA and you want to go ahead and get a second dose, go right ahead. Really, the data we have going from a one dose to a second dose, incredibly robust, and we have efficacy data. When you're looking at the Moderna and Pfizer boosters, we're really just talking about antibody levels. We're talking about a short duration of protection against infection. So far, we don't know what that will be. So yeah, one, we have really compelling efficacy. Go ahead, get that second J&J shot to get extra protection. mRNA, the Moderna, Pfizer, we're still waiting for how much extra bang do we get other than antibody elevation.
And we know with kids, we got that new data from the American Academy of Pediatrics that shows September was the worst month for child COVID infections. Do you think that we're going to see some real movement in the next couple of weeks on this?
Yeah, I mean, this is tragic. Early on in the pandemic, the children were protected. Give all the credit to their mothers, but dads probably played a part and grandparents there. But now that children have been exposed, we've seen hundreds of thousands. We've seen over 6 million children infected. We've seen thousands of children end up in the hospital. We've seen over 500 children die from COVID here in the United States alone. We are hearing on the 26th, there's going to be a discussion about extending that access to vaccination down to children 5 and up. It's not about herd immunity. It's not protecting adults. This is a decision to potentially add a layer of protection for those younger children.
I want to talk about this hybrid immunity. So there's that new Nature article that talks about infection and vaccination and why, they're really seeing this amazing protection.
Yeah, in a sense, we think of it as your third shot, right? Or with J&J, it would be your, an additional shot. COVID is here to stay. So right now we have
I rebuke that.
If you
No,
were
it's not.
infected before, and a lot of people are wondering, why am I
No,
going to
it's
get
not.
vaccinated? I've
No,
already
it's
had
not.
COVID. We certainly see those people get reinfected. But if a person who was previously infected gets vaccinated, they drop their risk by more than half. They may develop such robust protection that a lot of the common cold viruses, even in the same family as SARS-CoV-2, they may be protected against. This may be a really tremendous level. What we don't know is if you've had 2 vaccines or one J&J and then you get infected, what level of hybrid immunity is there? So we're waiting to see that data.
And what about this JAMA article looking to the future, that there could be a sprayed or like a squirted vaccine up your nose, which is interesting too, because when you think of it as, that's kind of where it goes.
Yeah, I think this is exciting. What we've been asking is now our vaccines to have a superpower. Before we look at the injectable polio vaccine, tremendous at keeping you from getting sick, but no real protection against infection. If we can get really high, frontline defenses, really stop people from even getting infected, could you do a nasal spray every 3 or 4 months? Sure. I don't think people want to keep getting injected all the time every 3 or 4 months, but it's exciting. And also think about children. A lot of individuals are not so excited about getting a needle, so having another option is fantastic.
All right, we do see your questions coming in, including about booster shots and infection rates. We're going to get to all of those coming up next.